Picking up from where we left off on our lecture regarding Chinese opera and particularly capital opera or Peking slash Beijing opera. Um, so the social status of actors in China was very low, um, not unlike the social status of actors in the Middle Ages and Renaissance Europe. Um, and even in Shakespeare's time, very few actors were recognized as citizens, so to speak. They might have been citizens of the country, but they were generally rejected by religious authorities in England. Frequently, they were not even allowed a Christian burial. Um, this was the case in Japan. It was also the case in China. Um, so these companies were made up of men and women originally, um, and these mixed companies were popular in the 13th and 14th centuries. But after that, they were, due to strict moral codes of uh, the new Confucianism, particularly characterized the Qing dynasty and the Ming Dynasty and later Qing Dynasty. They were banned, and Chinese opera became uh, something that was performed exclusively by men and boys. Um, this became somewhat of a problem as time went on, particularly within the courts theaters, because these boys, and again, this echoes over to Japanese drama as well. A lot of these young people who were selected because of their looks ended up being sort of consorts for the courtiers, and that ultimately became a problem. And in the end, men only were portrayed women's roles, and younger boys were also banned from performance. Um, One of the most legendary female impersonators and male performers to perform women's roles in Peking opera was a man named Mai Lang Fang, who was born into a family of famous Dan family, Dan being the female role. Um, he learned acting at a very young age and continued acting almost his entire life, except during the period of time when Japan was occupied by, or when China was occupied by Japan. The Japanese offered him a very prestigious role within their occupying government, and he refused to perform while China was occupied by Japan. Prior to that period, in the 1930s, Mai Lang Fang traveled to the Soviet Union, um, and during that time, he was able to perform uh, for some very important people in the world, on the world theater scene, including Konstantin Stanislavski, Bertolt Brecht, and Gordon Craig. Stanislavski being the father and progenitor of modern naturalistic acting. In fact, very little acting that you have probably seen in your life was not influenced by Stanislavski's work as it was later interpreted in the United States. Bertolt Brecht, who was the creator of something called epic theater, was very inspired by uh, Chinese opera, and particularly the work of Mai Lang Fang. And Gordon Craig, who was a leading designer who later worked in Europe as well as the United States, and was one of the great inspirations and teachers of one of the greatest scene designers of the United States, Robert Edmond Jones. Uh, they were all deeply inspired by the work of Chinese opera, and particularly Meiling Fang. So his life was dedicated to specializing in portraying the noble female type, and he expanded his work later to include um, a lot of different roles within it, but all female roles. He also was very fond of the old Kangju style of Chinese opera, and so created a revival within China of those traditional forms. The last person that we're going to talk about is a controversial figure. Um, she was an actress in her own right in the 1930s, particularly in film acting. Um, and her name is Jiang Qing. She was the fourth wife of Mao Zedong, the great communist ruler in China. And the reason that she is so important, ultimately, in the study of Chinese opera, is that during the Cultural Revolution, which I'm showing you the page of right now, Jiang Qing was instrumental in integrating Chinese opera into the communist vision of Chinese life, and ultimately commissioned 5 revolutionary operas or model operas to be created based on Chinese classics. Um, these are some of the most striking examples of propaganda theater that you will see. There's one video that's assigned in our module, and the melding of propaganda and nationalistic ideology, communist ideology, to classical Chinese theater is remarkable and striking to behold. So I think it's really worth examining and reading this segment, as well as taking a close look at that particular example offered. And that concludes this segment of the lecture. Please take a look at all of these reading segments. When you're finished with those, you're going to want to take a very close look at the Chinese opera montage, which is pretty well laid out. It gives you 3 different options of either creating a montage, slideshow, or video montage. And what you're going to want to do is select examples of each of these items. A picture of a famous Chinese opera, theater space, an example of a picture of supporting techniques. Like I said, those were the water sleeves, use of the beard, use of the fan, um, use of handkerchiefs, etc. A famous actor, you can't use Meiling Fang, but there are others that you can choose from. A picture of one of the traditional musical instruments. A picture of an opera based on a famous Chinese novel. We talked a little bit about those in previous lectures, and there are many to choose from. And a picture from one of the 5 revolutionary Chinese operas or model operas commissioned by Jiang Qing. There is an example attached, and there's also a link to a slideshow that is up on YouTube. So you'll get 2 good examples of what that assignment can look like.